Hey guys, tonight we're going to sneak you into the Sistine Chapel before the sun is even awake. Strap a paint pot to your belt and let Michelangelo grumble at you until your shoulders liquefy. Fair warning, the scaffold is basically a giant Jenga tower greased with olive oil, and the only safety briefing involves a pope waving his slippers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. I like picturing all these quiet corners of the planet glowing softly while we time travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You surface from sleep the way a diver rises through dark water, slowly, lungs complaining, clutching the memory of a warm quilt that no longer exists. Rome is still a smudge of indigo outside the chapel door, but a single candle stub throws a gold coin of light onto the stone floor, and someone, probably you, has to climb before the plaster cools. The first ladder rung wobbles like a drunk philosopher, and your bare foot finds a slick of spilled linseed oil that somebody, also probably you, forgot to wipe last night. Halfway up, the whole scaffold sways, and you swear you hear the nails clear their throats in warning. Michelangelo is already overhead, a black silhouette against fresh plaster, humming what sounds like a Florentine sea shanty, except every third note is a curse. He doesn't greet you. Instead, he hands down a wooden pail the color of oxidized guacamole and indicates, with the kind of jerk that doubles as conversation, that you should hook it onto your belt beside the sausage-shaped bundle of brushes. The rope creaks like an old woman settling into a chair, and you feel the platform accept your weight the way a cat accepts a bath, reluctantly, with plans for revenge. A widely accepted historical fact, Michelangelo began the ceiling in 1508 under protest, convinced he was first and foremost a sculptor. A lesser-known quirky detail, he wore his boots to bed during this period because, according to a servant's laundry list, the maestro fears spiders more than papal wrath. An open question historians still argue about: did he really work flat on his back, or did he contort sideways like a human karma? The drawings are vague, and nobody thought to selfie-stick the process. The air up here is oddly tropical, thick with evaporating lime and the ghost of yesterday's wet paint. It smells like someone tried to cook chalk soup and scorched it. Your first task is simple: don't drip on the prophets. Second task: don't sneeze. A single achoo could crater the firmament. You steady your breathing the way scuba instructors recommend, only instead of sharks below you have an irate pontiff who views time as a personal insult. Somewhere down on the marble, Julius Roman II is already pacing. You can't see him yet, but the slip of velvet slippers against stone echoes upward like a metronome set to anxious. Your knees discover the plank splinters even through wool hose, and you make a mental note to sew padding tomorrow, knowing perfectly well you'll forget, because memory is the first thing evaporated by wet lime. A brush handle finds your palm, worn smooth by Michelangelo's grip. Holding it feels like borrowing someone else's dream. You dab ultramarine, ground lapis lazuli worth more than you earn in a decade. And the color is so illegally blue it makes the Tuscan sky look washed out and apologetic. The chapel below is still a cave of shadows, but every minute the windows bleach from plum to lavender, and the figures above you, half born, half imagined, begin to blush with life. Isaiah's scroll unfurls like a morning yawn. Daniel's lion stretches, tail flicking away invisible flies. You realize you're staring, mouth open, tasting plaster dust on your tongue, and Michelangelo clears his throat with the subtlety of a dropped bucket. Work, the cough says. Eternity isn't going to paint itself. You touch the ceiling for the first time, and it's warmer than you expected, almost feverish, as though God left the thermostat on high. The wet surface kisses the bristles, then clings, reluctant to let go. Pulling away feels like peeling a sticker off fruit. A single drop escapes, wobbling through candle smoke like a tipsy firefly, and you follow its descent with the slow-motion horror reserved for priceless disasters. It lands on your own sleeve instead of sacred plaster, tiny mercy, and leaves a blue bruise on the cloth that will never wash out, a souvenir from 16th century sky. Your shoulders already mutter mutiny, but the day hasn't technically started, which means you have 14 more hours of mutiny to look forward to. You stretch your neck until it pops. Soundtrack courtesy of your personal sound designer, the universe, and settle into the rhythm that will define the next several months. Dip, dab, smooth, wipe, breathe, repeat, all while suspended above the most famous floor in Christendom like a very cautious chandelier. Outside, a rooster experiments with a new chord progression, and Rome answers with the clatter of shutters. Inside, candlelight shrinks as dawn swells, and you feel the moment when night officially clocks out, an almost audible sigh that loosens the building's stone ribs. Your heartbeat slows to match the chapel's new, steady breathing, and you understand, possibly for the first time, that you're not just painting. You're borrowing years off your life to gift them to tourists who haven't been born yet. Michelangelo leans over, eyes red-rimmed, and mutters what might be encouragement or possibly a recipe for bean soup. You can't tell because Tuscan slang at 4 a.m. is its own dialect. Whatever it is, you nod, because agreeing is easier than parsing, and because the next section of ceiling waits, vast and hungry, for its daily slice of blue. You load the brush again, feeling the familiar tug between awe and terror, and you begin. The paint part swings against your hip like a sleepy metronome, and the first proper droplet, ultramarine, expensive enough to ransom a duke, slides off the brush and lands on the ridge of your thumb. It sits there, fat and gleaming, a tiny planet refusing to spin. You stare at it the way a cat watches a laser dart, half hypnotized, half offended, until the color seeps into the tiny creases of your skin and tattoos you with accidental sky. Somewhere below, Julius clears his throat with the delicacy of a trumpet solo. The droplet shivers but holds. You lick your lips, taste powdered lappies, and decide that if you're going to be permanently marked, it might as well be by 16th century luxury. A widely accepted historical fact, ultramarine pigment arrived in Rome via Venetian traders who'd hauled it over the Alps from Afghan mines. A lesser-known quirky detail, apprentices saved fingernail clippings to reuse as tiny paint scrapers. Yours are already curling in anticipation. An open question historians still wonder about: did Michelangelo ever secretly paint a self-portrait into the ceiling's cosmos? And if so, is he smirking or scowling? You wipe the planet thumbnail across your sleeve, leaving a comet-tail streak that will puzzle future dry cleaners, and turn back to the freshly laid intonaco. The plaster glows like damp bread, inviting and intimidating in equal measure. Michelangelo wants a base wash for the robe of the Cumean Sibyl, something that suggests both midnight and royalty without bankrupting the papal purse. You dip again, lighter this time, letting only the ghost of blue kiss the surface. The bristles fan out, a tiny forest-stroking cloud, and the color spreads until it hums. The chapel's air is already thick with evaporating lime. It fogs your glasses, if spectacles had been invented yet, and makes your eyes feel pickled. Every blink is a small surrender, yet you force yourself to keep them open, afraid that if you miss a second, the plaster will set into accidental topographies. Your free hand steadies the pail while your knees negotiate splinters the size of cathedral spires. Somewhere in the rafters a pigeon coos, either blessing or critiquing. You flip a mental coin and decide on blessing because criticism is rationed by popes, not birds. Michelangelo's brush enters from stage left, crossing yours in a silent high five of bristles. He doesn't look over. He doesn't need to. The man works by echolocation of the soul, sensing where your blue ends and his begins. Together you feather the edge until robe and void melt seamlessly, a gradient so smooth it could sell meditation apps. You feel the moment the color takes, a microscopic suction, as the lime drinks the pigment and locks it into geological time. It's oddly intimate, like handing someone your diary and watching them swallow the pages. Your back twinges, early warning seismic activity, but you ignore it because the ceiling demands amnesia for discomfort. Instead, you focus on temperature, the plaster cool against your knuckles, the paint lukewarm, the air a sweaty scarf around your neck. Somewhere below, a door thuds, probably a sacristan hauling incense, and the scaffold quivers like a nervous violin. You freeze, brush poised, waiting for the aftershock to settle. When nothing collapses, you exhale a lifetime and continue. Time softens. Minutes feel like butter left in sun. You lose yourself in miniature weather systems. A darker streak where the brush hesitate reigned, a lighter patch where you lifted too soon, forming accidental cumulus. Michelangelo hums again. Same sea shanty, new curse, and you realize the tune is syncing with your pulse. History books never mention the soundtrack, but every masterpiece has one, usually off-key and half-forgotten. A flicker of gilt surfaces, you're wielding wealth equivalent to a neighborhood of Roman real estate, and you're smearing it on a ceiling most peasants will never see. Then the gilt sinks, weighted by wonder, because maybe that's the point. Beauty as unreasonable excess, a firework shot at eternity. You dab once more, committing the theft of time and treasure, and feel the ceiling accept your confession. The droplet on your thumb is now a freckle, permanent, until skin cells turnover in a month or 4 centuries, depending on perspective. You flex the joint, testing, and decide it's a decent trade. 1 blue freckle for 1 square inch of forever. Michelangelo shifts, boots scraping, and you sense the next area waiting dry, hungry, impatient. You reload, steady your breath, and let the second kiss land. Your nostrils flare, and it's as if someone's grated a Roman street directly into your sinuses. Wet lime, powdered marble, a pinch of campfire, and the faintest whisper of old incense that's been lounging in the bricks since the previous century. The steam rising off today's patch of intonaco is warm enough to fog a handheld mirror if mirrors were small enough to carry up a ladder, which they aren't, so your glasses, okay, imagination, keep clouding instead. Each inhalation feels like swallowing a spoonful of hot chalk soup that's determined to graffiti the back of your throat. You try breathing through your mouth. The taste promptly moves in, renovates, and hangs up curtains. Michelangelo, immune by now, sniffs once, an orchestral snort that could clear balconies, and mutters, better than the sewers, which is the Renaissance equivalent of a 5-star Yelp review. You cough politely, the way people do when they'd like to lodge a complaint with the universe, but don't want to seem needy. The lime answers with a tickle that threatens to become a sneeze, and sneezing on wet plaster is right up there with juggling papal maces. Technically passable, career limiting. You press the inside of your wrist against your nose, leaving a blue smudge from the earlier thumb freckle, and bargain with your diaphragm for 30 seconds of peace. A widely accepted historical fact, Renaissance plaster intonaco was made from slaked lime and marble dust, mixed in precise ratios and applied in small patches so it wouldn't dry before pigments arrived. A lesser-known quirky detail, workers sometimes tossed orange peel into the slurry to sweeten the air. You half expect to see a rind float by like a tiny citrus lifeboat. An open question historians still debate. Did the acidic citrus subtly alter the plaster's chemistry, enhancing longevity? Or was it just the world's most expensive potpourri? The heat radiating upward makes the ceiling feel alive, a pale beast exhaling with each second's long breath. Sweat beads under your cap, trickles past your ear, and drips off your jaw, only to evaporate before it can sabotage the paint. You imagine the droplet reincarnating as a cloud somewhere over the Tiber and feel oddly philanthropic. Meanwhile, your shoulders conduct an ache that starts as viola and is already auditioning for tuba. You shift weight from knee to knee, but the plank refuses negotiation. Splinters are the original non-fungible tokens, and you're collecting them all. Below, the chapel's air stratifies, cool marble breath at floor level, lukewarm holiness in the pews, tropical genius up where you dangle. You picture future tourists sniffing audio guides, never knowing they're inhaling molecules of your sinus chalk. The thought is weirdly comforting, immortality through second-hand dust. Michelangelo scrapes his trowel, snapping you back. The next section awaits its skin graft of wet white. Time to stop admiring the weather and start painting it before the plaster develops a crusty personality of its own. You exhale, slow and deliberate, watching lime fog curl away from your lips like dragon smoke wearing a halo. The sneeze subsides, defeated by diplomacy. Somewhere in the rafters, the pigeon applauds with one wing. Or maybe that's just your inner ear adjusting to altitude. Either way, you dip the brush, steady the bucket, and wade nose first back into the cloud. You hear the slippers before you see them. Papal velvet slapping marble in a rhythm that sounds suspiciously like a countdown timer. Julius Roman II appears below, crimson robe pooling around his ankles like spilled communion wine. He paces a tight oval beneath the scaffold, head craned back, eyes narrow, the universal expression of a man who ordered eternity expedited and just received news that infinity is running late. Each lap is punctuated by a sniff that could freeze plaster. You half expect the morning steam to reverse direction and crawl back into the bucket. Michelangelo freezes mid-stroke, brush hovering like a cat that's been caught on a kitchen counter. You follow suit, shoulders locking into the statue position officially known as "Please don't fire me." The Pope stops directly under Isaiah, finger jabbing skyward, not at the prophet, at you. "When," he calls, voice ricocheting off cornices, "will the firmament be finished?" The word "finished" echoes twice, a stereo delay nobody asked for. You consider answering shortly after the last judgment, Your Holiness. But wisdom swallows your tongue. Sarcasm is a luxury apprentices can't invoice. A widely accepted historical fact, Pope Julius Roman II, nicknamed Il Papa Terribile, was famous for his volatile temper and impatience with artists. A lesser-known quirky detail, he kept a pet elephant named Hanno who reportedly bowed during Mass. Sadly, Hanno is not on pacing duty today. An open question historians still wonder about, Did Julius threaten to demolish the ceiling halfway through, or was that merely aggressive interior decorating? Michelangelo mutters something in Tuscan too muddy for your ears, then switches to Latin smooth as butter. You catch the phrase Opus Dei and decide that blaming God for schedule slippage is managerial genius. Julius softens, barely like bread crust dipped in wine. He resumes pacing, but the tempo slows from allegro to adagio, granting everyone a stay of execution, possibly literal. You exhale through your teeth, a whistle without conviction, and feel the scaffold settle as collective blood pressure descends. The Pope's perfume, rosewater mixed with parchment and power, wafts upward, a cloud you could probably bottle and sell as infallibility now. 5. Your stomach answers with a growl that could pass for a small dog barking 2 streets away. Breakfast was a rumor you forgot to verify. Julius finally exits, robes swishing like theater curtains at final bow, and the chapel inhales. Michelangelo waits 3 beats, then flicks paint at the floor where the pontiff stood, a juvenile protest that feels downright collegiate. You stifle a laugh. It exits as a hiccup, ricochets off Daniel's knee, and dissolves into the lime fog. Work resumes, heartbeat by heartbeat, the schedule now compressed by papal glare into something resembling a sausage stuffed into a sock. You add extra ultramarine to the Sibyl's cloak, reasoning that if Julius wants speed, he'll at least get expensive. Somewhere below, the slippers slap once more, farther away this time, like a snare drum exiting stage left. You relax vertebra by vertebra, remind yourself that deadlines are mortal, ceilings less so, and coax the brush back into its dance before the echo returns. Michelangelo shuffles sideways until his shoulder blade nudges yours, a wordless admission that the scaffold is too narrow for both ego and personal space. He shoves a walnut-sized glob of pigment into your palm, raw umber, oily, fragrant as a freshly opened bag of coffee beans that someone accidentally buried in a barn. "Make brown," he grunts, which feels less like instruction and more like existential critique. You glance around for a mixing plank. He taps his own forehead. Apparently today that's the menu board. You smear the blob across the heel of your hand, warming it, working it, until it loosens into something that might convincingly shadow the ribs of a very athletic prophet. A widely accepted historical fact, Michelangelo mixed many of his paints directly on wooden boards or even on the back of his hand, a quick and dirty studio habit. A lesser-known quirky detail, he sometimes used stale bread as disposable pallets, then ate the evidence, oil, paint, and all, claiming it added body to lunch. An open question historians still debate. Did ingesting all those pigments contribute to his famously foul moods, or was that just standard artistic seasoning? You fold in a pinch of lampblack, tiny, greasy snowflakes that immediately stain your lifeline like a fortune you don't want told. A thimble of turpentine cuts the mud pie, releasing fumes that smell like someone set a pine forest on fire, then tried to put it out with vinegar. Your eyes water, but the mixture blooms into a velvety chocolate with hints of espresso and yesterday's resentment. Michelangelo nods, which is the equivalent of 5 stars and a knighthood, then flicks his brush toward the Sibyl's armpit, shadow country. You obey, dabbing where clavicle meets mysterious drapery, and watch the brown sink in, giving anatomy an extra helping of gravitas. While you work, he lectures the air in muttered couplets, something about sculptors forced to doodle on ceilings, cadavers wasted on anatomy lessons, popes who think deadlines are divine comedy. None of it is directed at you, yet all of it sticks like burrs to the inside of your skull. You realize you're breathing in sync with his cadence, a metronome of mild discontent. Somewhere below, a door slams. Both of you flinch, smearing parallel lines that look like parentheses around an unspoken curse. You blend them away before they can gossip. Your wrist cramps, but the brown is finally behaving. Soft, obedient, ready to pretend it's always been three-dimensional. Michelangelo leans in, adds a single bristle flick of highlight, and just like that, the Sibyl flexes muscle you didn't know paint could possess. He straightens, cracks his neck like someone stepping on twigs, and shuffles off to berate a nearby angel. You're left holding the leftover umber, now shaped suspiciously like your own mood, mostly stable, slightly gritty, capable of darkening anything it touches. You scrape it onto a crust of yesterday's bread, future snack, future therapy, and tuck the palette under your thigh where warmth will keep it workable and splinters will keep you awake. A gust of wind. Really just a monk opening the sacristy door too enthusiastically, sends the full-size cartoon fluttering overhead like an anxious sail. The paper is gray with centuries of spilled charcoal, edges nibbled by ambitious moths who dream in Gothic arches. It hovers inches above your face, close enough that you read the reversed handwriting, Sibyl, left toe, fix or die. Michelangelo skewers the sheet with a long charcoal stick, pinning it back against the ceiling so the drawing kisses the wet plaster, ready to surrender its design. Your job, Pounce, not enthusiastically, literally. You're handed a small cloth bag stuffed with powdered charcoal, instructions implied, tap, pat, betray. You dab the bag along the perforated lines, releasing a mist of darts that freckle the plaster like inverse constellations. Each tap sounds like a librarian clearing her throat. Collectively, they form a connect the dots map no child would volunteer for. When the cartoon lifts away, the Sibyl's toe remains, ghostly but confident, waiting for pigment to give it blood. A widely accepted historical fact, full-scale cartoons were pricked along outlines and dusted with charcoal to transfer images onto fresh plaster. A lesser-known quirky detail, apprentices sometimes used leftover incense powder instead of charcoal, hoping the toe would smell holy for eternity. An open question historians still wonder about: did Michelangelo ever alter the design after transfer, or was improvisation reserved for lunchtime grumbling? You step aside so the master can inspect. He squints, grunts approval, then flicks one rogue dart off the plaster with a fingernail that could slice bread. The rejected speck lands on your sleeve, a microscopic black hole absorbing all future blame. You exhale dust and discover your snot has turned avant-garde gray. Tomorrow's handkerchief will look like a mood ring. With the blueprint secured, the real coloring may begin. You fetch a smaller brush, size angel eyelash, and circle the toe like a cartographer outlining undiscovered land. Michelangelo disappears toward Jonah, muttering about storm clouds needing darker linings. You're left alone with a foot that will never wear sandals again. Each charcoal dart a tiny checkpoint in a relay race against drying lime. The plaster cools beneath your knuckles, ticking like quiet Geiger counter. You dab, connect, coax ultramarine veins into existence, confident the toe will eventually support prophecy, and possibly your reputation, if it survives papal pacing and pigeon sabotage. You pause to load the brush, just a breath, really, and catch the faint susurrus drifting from the corner where two painted cherubs lounge. Their cheeks are still chalky underpaint, eyes mere charcoal crescents, yet you swear one whispers to the other, voice papery as dried rose petals. Tourists, the left cherub sighs, will selfie us into pixel dust. The right one giggles, a sound like dice rolling across marble. You glance around. Michelangelo is halfway across the scaffold, arguing with a thundercloud he hasn't painted yet, so you lean closer, ear tilted to eavesdrop on artwork in progress. Left cherub continues. Bet you the tall one drops his phone on the floor tiles, cracks both screen and dignity. Right cherub wagers a golden halo leaf on. Someone flashes bare shoulders. Guard blows whistle, whole room sighs in Latin. Their bets sound ludicrous until you remember you're from a century where both prophecies already trended on social media. Apparently even unfinished angels possess algorithmic foresight. A widely accepted historical fact, the Sistine Chapel attracts roughly 5 million visitors annually, many of whom attempt forbidden photos. A lesser-known quirky detail. Early restorers in the 1930s reported hearing chirps from fresh plaster, attributing it to settling moisture. Restorers now blame overwork, but you know better. An open question historians still wonder about: did Michelangelo believe his figures contained literal spirits, or was his muttered conversation merely standard artistic anthropomorphism? You dab a highlight on the left cherub's knee, and the whisper cuts mid-sentence. Apparently pigment works as gag order. For a heartbeat, the chapel feels conspiratorial, ceiling leaning in, walls cupping echoes so nothing escapes. You consider sharing the prophecy with Michelangelo, decide against interrupting a man who's losing a shouting match to imaginary weather, and file the gossip away as future cocktail trivia, assuming you ever return to an era that serves cocktails. Brush loaded again, you outline the right cherub's wing, each feather a potential ear for more secrets. None come. Instead, the scaffolding creaks a metallic sigh, translating body weight into Morse code that travels down wooden struts and lands somewhere near the altar as a barely audible groan. You imagine the entire building gossiping about you. Tourist from tomorrow, bad at ladders, decent with blue. Embarrassing, but fair. Michelangelo shuffles back, eyes narrowed, suspicious of anyone smiling unsupervised. You wipe the grin off your face using the inside of your cheek and point to the cherubs as if to say, just wing detail, nothing metaphysical. He grunts, flicks a fly off the horizon line, and returns to his tempest, leaving you alone with angels who have already moved on to betting on your untimely sneeze. You hold your breath, partly to foil prophecy, partly because the lime still stings, and continue painting, hoping heaven's odds makers are kind. Your sleeve, once a respectable linen-ish hue, now resembles a star map drawn by a drunk astronomer. Ultramarine nebulae, vermilion supernovas, and a suspicious green streak that might be planetary mold. You notice this because a drop of dilute copper ricynate has just slid off the brush, paused at your cuff like a skydiver reconsidering, then parachuted into your lap, leaving a comet tail of jade. Somewhere in the physics of pigment, you've accidentally discovered new constellations, the smudged prophet, the drip that ate Jonah, the eternal pasta stain. Michelangelo's own sleeves are no cleaner. His left forearm hosts a galaxy of gray-brown smears that could double as lunar charts. He catches you star-gazing and shrugs, maps for people who have never been anywhere. You nod, filing the phrase away for future tattoo inspiration, and return to your personal sky. Each fleck records a micro-moment, when the scaffold jerked, when Julius barked, when a cherub whispered stark tips. Celestial breadcrumbs you could follow all the way back to your own century if you ever needed proof you were here. A widely accepted historical fact, Renaissance artists rarely wore modern smocks, They simply ruined their clothes and bought new ones with patron advances. A lesser-known quirky detail. Some pigments photosensitive over centuries. Your sleeve astronomy might literally fade and rearrange as light shifts, giving you a slow-motion time lapse of one workday. An open question historians still wonder about: could future spectroscopy decode exact dates from pigment layers on contemporary clothing, turning laundry into archival evidence? You dip into a fresh puddle of lead tin yellow, sometimes called the sun in a can, and daub a halo around a Sibyl's finger. The color is so bright it hums C major. Tiny particles swim like plankton under a microscope. A second drop escapes, lands near the first, and suddenly you've invented binary star systems on a biblical ceiling. You imagine tourists centuries from now leaning back, necks aching, unaware they're also admiring your wardrobe's fossil record. Below, a sacristan clangs the hour. Vibrations travel up the scaffold and translate into a shiver across your paint pot, rippling the surface into rings of Saturn. You feel cosmically ridiculous, half artist, half accidental observatory. Yet the work continues, constellation by constellation, until the heavens look homesick for a place they've never seen. And somewhere in the corner of your vision, a still wet star winks, acknowledging that every masterpiece secretly doubles as a diary written in spit, pigment, and sweat. Noon arrives with the grace of a dropped crate. Someone down on the piazza rings the Angelus bell, but up here the sound is more like a tin casserole falling downstairs. Your stomach answers with a bass note that vibrates through the scaffold boards and possibly registers on nearby seismographs. Michelangelo hears it, fishes in his satchel, and produces a loaf so fossilized it could be used to chisel marble. He snaps it in half. The crack echoes off Elijah's sandals. You receive your portion, still warm from proximity to pigment parts, because bread doubles as insulation in a pinch, and pray you won't break a premolar on a crust that could armor galleys. A widely accepted historical fact: laborers in Renaissance Rome typically ate 2 meals a day, a light midday snack and a larger evening supper. A lesser-known quirky detail: painters sometimes softened stale bread by dipping it in diluted gesso, which added calcium to their diet and probably confused their digestive tracts for centuries. An open question historians still wonder about: did shared meals foster cooperative creativity, or merely align everyone's constipation? You gnaw, jaw muscles staging their own David versus Goliath reboot. The crumb tastes of linseed and plaster dust, giving you the distinct impression you're eating wall. Between bites, you count cherub toes. There are 8 within visual range, all perfect, all unpainted, all silently judging your table manners. Michelangelo chews horizontally, eyes on the horizon line of profits, as if flavor were optional and calories theoretical. A pigeon lands on the upper rail, eyes the bread, calculates risk versus reward, opts for dignity and flaps away. Its own midday snack vetoed by avian snobbery. Below, Julius's voice drifts in, arguing with a cardinal about budget overruns. Numbers float upward like paper airplanes made of gold leaf. You swallow powdered stone, wash it down with a sip of clouded water from a leather flask that tastes faintly of yesterday's garlic. The scaffold sways gently, lulling you into a stupor that could almost be called rest if your knees weren't auditioning for percussion. Michelangelo stuffs the remaining crust back into his bag. Future weapon, future spoon, future eraser. And without ceremony, you both stand, crumbs snowing onto the marble where tourists will someday puzzle over inexplicable beige flecks fossilized in the floor. Lunch is concluded. Eternity awaits its next coat. The moment you rinse your brush, the sky on the ceiling decides to misbehave. A translucent wash of grey, meant to be a distant cloud, spreads outward like gossip at a family wedding, feathering into the freshly painted blue until the boundary resembles soggy stationery. Michelangelo notices first. His left eyebrow arches high enough to host its own prophet. He mutters something that rhymes with Mamma Mia and definitely doesn't appear in the Vulgate, then hands you a rag the color of every mistake ever made. Salvage protocol. Blot. Don't rub. You press the cloth gently, wicking pigment and water together into a bruise-colored bloom. The plaster drinks anyway, leaving behind a pale scar shaped uncannily like the Italian boot, appropriate, inconvenient. Time, already a scarce commodity, races against the setting lime. In 3 minutes, this accident will be geology. You consider turning the boot into an actual country. Add a microscopic Sicily, maybe a Dolomite or two. But Michelangelo flicks your ear, fix, don't embellish. A widely accepted historical fact, Fresco painters constantly battled unpredictable watermarks called bloom or clouding, caused by excess moisture in pigment application. A lesser-known quirky detail, some artists intentionally left small water stains, believing they added atmospheric realism, divine humidity, so to speak. An open question historians still wonder about are certain stormy patches in the ceiling original intent or happy accidents that Michelangelo simply refused to correct. You mix a rescue batch, ultramarine cut with a drop of white, and a prayer, then feather the edges so softly your wrist forgets its own pulse. Gradually, the boot dissolves into generic cumulus, non-denominational, paperly acceptable. The rag, now a souvenir atlas, gets stuffed behind a brace where future restorers will find it and wonder why someone mapped Europe on linen. Michelangelo exhales through his nose, a sound like a small accordion giving up, and returns to his thunderstorm, leaving you to monitor the sky for further acts of meteorological rebellion. For the next hour, you babysit the cloud, adding translucent glazes thinner than excuses. It behaves, mostly, shifting from bruise to breeze, a near parable about covering errors with patience and sheer nerve. Somewhere above the fictional horizon, the first dab of lightning waits, but that's tomorrow's crisis. Today's deluge has been downgraded to a mild overcast, and you'll take any weather that doesn't rain unemployment. Michelangelo's baritone cracks the air again. Still off-key, still half sea shanty, half gripe. He's singing about marble quarries in Carrara, about stone that behaves versus plaster that sulks, and every third beat he detours into a curse aimed at his own cramping wrist. The tune skitters across Jonah's oversized vine leaves, bounces off the bronze shields of the ignudi, and lands in your ear like a drunk friend who refuses to leave the party. You find yourself swaying in spite of yourself, brush tapping the plank in accidental percussion. A widely accepted historical fact, Michelangelo wrote poetry complaining of neck pain and the bath of paint droppings he endured while frescoing. A lesser-known quirky detail, he composed by singing lines aloud, testing syllable counts against hammer strokes from downstairs repair work, an early form of industrial beat poetry. An open question historians still wonder about, did he intentionally vary tempo to pace assistants' brushwork, or was he just incapable of holding a tune? Between refrains, he pauses to hawk a modest loogie into a rag, then resumes without dropping rhythm. Professional multitasking. The lyrics today involve a louse who thinks it's a prophet, a pope who thinks he's God, and a scaffold that thinks it's the apocalypse. Basically, a Renaissance diss track. You wait for the chorus, realize there isn't one, and supply a mental refrain of dripping brushes. Plink, swish, curse, creating call and response no congregation would sanction. Oddly, the singing steadies your hand. Each off-pitch note becomes a metronome, each muttered maldetto, a reminder that genius is just stubbornness wearing better pants. You imagine future audio guides describing celestial symbolism while omitting the soundtrack of one man grouching his way through Genesis. Your shoulders loosen, the brush glides, and somewhere between the third and fourth stanza about dietary regret, you and the ceiling find shared tempo. The chapel becomes a resonating chamber, mediocre opera and all, proving that great art can absorb any frequency, even the ones that make pigeons wince. The afternoon heat decides to settle like a cat on your chest, warm, weighty, indifferent to oxygen. Plaster that steamed this morning now dries faster than gossip, sucking moisture from pigment and from you. You feel the exact second the surface skins over. The brush drags, once silky, now scuffs like velvet against Velcro. Michelangelo senses it too. He's part barometer, and barks, faster, not sloppier, which is like asking someone to sprint on ice while holding crystal. You mix a puddle of dilute verdaxio, the greenish underpaint used to mold cheeks before pink dares appear, and start feathering shadows onto the Cumean Sibyl's throat. A widely accepted historical fact, fresco requires applying color to damp plaster so pigment binds chemically as the wall carbonates. Miss the window, and the paint merely sits on top and flakes. A lesser-known quirky detail, artists kept damp sponges in ceramic bowls under the scaffold, squeezing them to create micro-humidity pockets. Proto-greenhouse tech. An open question historians still wonder about. Did Michelangelo ever re-wet small areas to extend working time, risking a weaker bond? Or did he accept dry and repaint a secco later? Your sponge, elderly and brown, drips politely beside your knee. You dab it along the edge of the internaco, buying minutes, maybe seconds. The plaster drinks, swells, softens. The brush glides again, grateful. Sweat beads off your nose and you panic. One salty drop could blossom into a permanent stain. You tilt sideways, letting gravity redirect the missile onto your own sleeve, sacrificing fabric for fresco, the truest devotion you can offer Renaissance art. Michelangelo's section is larger, his deadline tighter. He paints almost violently, as if intimidating the wall into staying wet. Chips of excess plaster ricochet, peppering your arm with gritty freckles. You trade glances, his wild, yours pleading, and synchronize when he leans left, you lean right. Choreography of two people sharing one bathroom mirror the size of salvation. The sun outside tilts, light shafts crawl across marble, and the chapel becomes an hourglass where drying plaster marks time louder than any bell. You finish the throat just as the surface shifts from receptive to hostile. Chemistry's version of thanks, we're full. Sponge retired, you sit back on aching heels and watch the verdaxio settle into its new stone home, a green ghost that will blush peach tomorrow when highlights arrive. For now, the illusion holds, neck curved, shadow breathing, prophecy tanned and ready for eternity's close-up. You exhale, realize you've been holding breath since the sponge first dripped, and reward yourself with a single thought, one more square foot of forever, checked off the mortal to-do list. Michelangelo straightens, knuckles pressed to the small of his back, and flicks his eyes toward the marble floor 30 feet below. You follow his gaze. A single sandal print, outlined in orange-yellow, tracks across the aisle. Yours, from when you descended for more pigment and stepped in the puddle of azimuth clay you'd kicked over earlier. The print points toward the altar like a breadcrumb of guilt. Michelangelo's eyebrow lifts, silent indictment. You shrug an apology worthy of a teenager caught sneaking in after curfew, then hustle down the ladder to erase evidence before Julius materializes and adds footprints to his litany of grievances. A widely accepted historical fact, the Sistine Chapel floor is a Renaissance mosaic of marble salvaged from ancient Roman buildings, each slab veined like prosciutto. A lesser-known quirky detail, sacristans collected colorful shoe prints left by artists, sometimes chiseling small samples to identify pigment batches, early forensic archiving. An open question historians still wonder about. Do those microscopic pigment grains still hide between marble joints? A hidden archive of every color ever floated above. You kneel, spit on the floor Renaissance Windex, and scrub with the tail of your shirt. The stain resists, spreads, then gradually lifts, tinting your saliva Monet watercolor. Foot traffic over centuries will eventually polish away whatever you miss, but you'd rather not gift future scholars a puzzle titled Orange Toe of Unknown Assistant, 1508. While you're down there, you notice faint flecks, ultramarine, cinnabar, even a speck of gold near a choir stall, archaeology of accidents. You imagine a graduate thesis born from one dusty fleck, and almost laugh. Instead, you pocket a rogue grain of lapis, not for scholarship but for luck, a little sky to carry in your darkest seam. Back up the ladder you climb, each rung creaking Morse code that spells careless. Michelangelo has already returned to his Tempest, but he spares you a sideways glance that feels weirdly like approval, possibly because you cleaned your own mess, possibly because you provided 5 seconds of comic relief. You hook the part back onto your belt, resolved to watch where gravity drops things, and let the brush reclaim its dance, footloose but footprint-free. Gold Leaf Day arrives in the form of a palm-sized booklet, so thin it flirts with translucence. Each sheet is sandwiched between tissue pages that rustle like scandalous letters. You peel one free with a squirrel hair brush charged with static. The leaf leaps, clings, and suddenly your fingertip wears a knuckle-sized sun. Michelangelo eyes you. Gold equals budget and budget equals Pope, so precision outranks showmanship. You exhale slowly, a human humidifier, because one stray breeze could transform weeks of papal coin into an extremely expensive glitter storm. A widely accepted historical fact, Renaissance gold leaf was hammered until roughly 0.1 micron thick, about 1/10 the width of a human hair. A lesser-known quirky detail, static electricity from cat fur, was sometimes used to lift and position leaf. You consider borrowing the monastery mouser, but settle for your own arm hair raised by nervous energy. An open question historians still wonder about. Did Michelangelo personally lay any gold on the ceiling? Or did he delegate every gleam to underlings while muttering about gaudy ostentation? You lower the sheet onto a halo drawn yesterday in bowl, reddish clay that acts both as adhesive and color enhancer. The moment leaf kisses earth, it crinkles like old skin, then relaxes under gentle pressure from a cotton pad. Light explodes upward, ricocheting off rafters, turning motes into slow-motion meteors. For an instant, the entire chapel feels airborne, a reliquary launched inside a sunbeam. You half expect the Pope to barge in demanding landing clearance. Burnishing comes next, an agate dog tooth tool rubbed in tight circles until the surface reflects your own dilated pupil. You watch yourself warp, nose ballooning, eyes merging, and funhouse preview of how centuries will distort all of us. Stroke by stroke, the halo becomes a mirror nobody can resist, including you. Time softens. The only sound is stone polishing metal into stone, a circular argument that somehow produces shine. When you finally straighten, neck vertebrae crack like thrown pebbles, but the halo gleams, smug as a cat who licked the moon. Michelangelo nods, papal bling achieved, frugality pacified, eternity freshly gilded. You straighten, gold burnishing complete, and find yourself nose to navel with Jonah, specifically with the prophet's painted navel, a dimple rendered with such persuasive shadow you swear lint could live there. The giant figure lounges overhead, back arched, eyes rolled heavenward as if to ask, "Why did I agree to whale transit?" You've passed him dozens of times, but today, thanks to fresh halo glare, every tendon pops like over tightened lute strings. Michelangelo notices you're gawking and waves a hand. Go on, talk to him. He listens better than the Pope. You laugh, then realize you're literally staring into the pupils of someone twice life size and still shrinking you like a bad report card. A widely accepted historical fact. Michelangelo painted Jonah directly above the altar as a symbolic guardian of the church's sacramental core. A lesser-known quirky detail, restorers discovered tiny compass holes in Jonah's eyes, suggesting Michelangelo plotted gaze lines so precisely the prophet appears to watch clergy ascending the altar steps. An open question historians still wonder about: does Jonah's expression convey divine ecstasy or pre-whale nausea? Basically, is he rapt or about to Ralph? You test the gaze. Shift left, irises follow. Shift right, same. It's the original Big Brother minus the television royalties. A shiver spider walks your spine. You feel judged for every shortcut you've taken, gold you've wasted, bread you've bitten. Jonah's left eyebrow, edged in verdaxio, cocks higher, and you swear it's an accusation about the orange footprint you left downstairs. You whisper an apology, feel ridiculous, then whisper it again because Renaissance guilt is apparently contagious. Michelangelo crouches beside you, voice low. He wins every staring contest since 1511. You ask who modeled for those eyes. The master taps his own chest, self-portrait smuggled into scripture. Suddenly, the judgment feels personal, genius critiquing apprentice across 400 years of paint. You straighten, meet the gaze, and hold it until your eyes water, refusing to blink on principle. Jonah wins, obviously, but you last long enough to earn a grunt that might be respect or paint fumes. Either way, you step back, neck tingling, aware you've been interviewed by a Fresco and found wanting, yet still employed. Michelangelo hands you a candle stub the length of his thumb, its wick bent like a sailor who's changed his mind about drowning. Night work. The chapel's windows have been shuttered against moonlight poachers, and Julius wants progress photos. Well, progress viewings, first thing tomorrow. Your orders are simple. Illuminate prophets, don't ignite them. You wedge the taper into a cracked terracotta dish, strike flint, and a bloom of gold smaller than a coin throws long shadows across the scaffold planks. Suddenly, every brushstroke becomes theater, every drip a potential special effect. The flame gutters each time you exhale, so you breathe through your nose, a human bellows trying not to snuff its own spotlight. A widely accepted historical fact. Artists often painted after sunset using small oil lamps or candles, especially when papal deadlines loomed. A lesser-known quirky detail: candle smoke leaves a fine carbon film. Restorers can date overtime sessions by soot layers trapped beneath later varnish. An open question historians still wonder about: did Michelangelo rotate assistants to prevent eye strain hallucinations, or did he expect visions to improve the composition? Jonah's robe, half-green shadow in daylight, now ripples bottle black, except where the flame licks it emerald, an accidental mood ring. You poke Verdaxio into a calf muscle and watch it vanish, reappear, vanish again, like a magic trick performed by an unreliable wizard. Somewhere below, a guard coughs. The echo arrives 3 seconds late, a ghost audience applauding poorly. Michelangelo works by sense memory, fingers skating across plaster he can barely see, humming that same sea shanty now transposed into minor key. Every few minutes he pinches the wick, shortening the flame to reduce smoke, and each time the world shrinks to a coin-sized sun orbiting your hands. Your own shadow looms overhead, 20 feet tall, head bumping against guard's floating torso, an inadvertent self-portrait nobody will ever paint. You wiggle 3 fingers. The giant on the ceiling wiggles back, a muppet of destiny. For a moment you consider signing your silhouette, a shadow tag hidden in plain sight, but Michelangelo clears his throat, arson bad, anonymity good. You settle for a microscopic initial inside a prophet's fingernail, visible only to candlelight and bored angels. The stub burns lower, wax pooling like warm taffy. When it gutters out, you'll be finished for the night, another layer of carbon ghosting the ceiling, proof that overtime has always smelled slightly of burnt wick and ambition. Evening chant drifts up from the Sistine chapel's lower clergy like slow-motion surf. Low, rolling Latin that laps against the scaffold legs and soaks the planks with calm. The voices braid into one thick rope, tugging gently at your ankles, inviting you down into the nave to join or nap, or both. You stay put, the plaster still breathes, and you've another hour before it hardens into tomorrow's geology. Each syllable, salve regina, lands on your brush hand, steadying it like a metronome carved out of incense. Michelangelo, rarely reverent, hums along an octave lower, his baritone adding gravel to their silk, a human basso who refuses to stay on pitch or on key, yet somehow fits. A widely accepted historical fact: the chapel's daily office included vespers sung by the papal choir using Gregorian melodies, standardized long before Michelangelo began. A lesser-known quirky detail: masons on break sometimes harmonized from the scaffold, creating accidental stereophonics. Clergy below, laborers above, an early surround sound system. An open question historians still wonder about: did those overlapping harmonies inspire rhythmic patterns in the ceiling's design, or was the coincidence merely celestial? The chant works like audible lavender. Your neck, previously a stack of angry crockery, loosens, vertebrae settle with muffled clicks. Even Jonah's stare softens, pupils dilated by candle smoke and plainchant until he looks positively benevolent, maybe stoned. You float the brush along a prophet's beard, each stroke landing between choral heartbeats, error rate dropping to near zero. Somewhere below, a thurible swings. Metallic chimes ride the melody upward, sprinkling sonic glitter onto the scaffold. You half expect the ceiling to inhale, ribs expanding under the weight of song, and perhaps it does. Tiny cracks in the intonaco sigh, drinking vibration along with water. When the final O Clemens dissolves into stone, silence feels louder, like a room just after the kettle clicks off. You set the brush down, flex fingers that suddenly remember they're attached to a human, and realize the chant has tuned your internal tempo to something approaching peace. Michelangelo extinguishes the candle. Smoke writes a lazy, cursive spiral toward God's fingertip, an incense ghost finishing the prayer you didn't say. Michelangelo fishes a palm-sized agate from his pouch, egg-shaped, banded in caramel and cream, and hands it over like he's surrendering a tiny planet. "More shine," he grunts, tapping the still tacky halo of Daniel's lion. "You understand, burnish the gold until it mirrors the future, or at least the next pope." You grip the stone, warm from his pocket, and begin small clockwise circles, pressure firm enough to polish but gentle enough not to scour the leaf away. The agate chatters softly, a contented gecko scraping plaster, and within seconds the lion's halo blooms into a sun you could shave in. A widely accepted historical fact, agate, being harder than gold but softer than steel, was the standard Renaissance burnisher, often shaped from ancient signet stones recycled for the purpose. A lesser-known quirky detail, some masters stored agates in their armpits between sessions, believing body oil's enhanced glide, an early ergonomic hack that doubled as pickpocket deterrent. An open question historians still wonder about: do microscopic agate dust particles embedded in halos affect reflective indices over centuries, subtly altering how light dances for tourists' cameras? You resist the armpit method. Your sweat already carries enough lime, bread, and existential dread. Instead, you breathe on the halo, a miniature fog machine, and watch condensation disappear in a flash, leaving gold so bright it seems to buzz. Michelangelo leans in, eyeball inches from your knuckles, checking for hairline scratches that could scatter light like gossip. Satisfied, he flicks the lion's mane with a liner brush, adding a final whisker that grazes the halo's edge, an intersection of fur and eternity. Static crackles. A hair-thin gold fragment lifts, drifts, and adheres to your forearm like a kiss from Midas. You decide to keep it there, a temporary tattoo of papal budget, until showering becomes an option sometime next century. Burnishing complete, you pocket the agate. He doesn't ask for it back, a loan bordering on trust, and flex your cramping thumb. The lion now sports a halo bright enough to guide magi, astrologers, or simply Romans looking for late-night pizza. Somewhere below, a sacristan snuffs torches. Reflections ripple across the chapel like golden pond rings, and you feel, absurdly, that you've just polished a piece of the sun and put it back where it belongs, without burning anyone in the process. You sign nothing yet. Michelangelo's policy, no autographs on God's ceiling, feels less humility, more brand control. The work speaks, the maker vanishes. Still, the urge nags like a popcorn kernel between molars. While the master argues with a cherub's kneecap 3 planks away, you consider micro-graffiti, initials inside a prophet's ear canal. A tiny date beneath a toenail. You settle on discretion and simply press an extra highlight into the fold of Ezekiel's scroll, an innocuous stroke identical to thousands, but placed at an angle only you could repeat. Future restorers, if bored and spectroscopically nosy, might notice the bristle curvature differs by 2 degrees. That will have to suffice for immortality. A widely accepted historical fact, Michelangelo ultimately signed only one work, the Pieta, after overhearing viewers attribute it to another sculptor. A lesser-known quirky detail, Some assistants hid personal symbols, a rabbit, a star in border foliage. One supposedly tucked a wife's initial inside a serpent's tonsil. An open question historians still wonder about. Did Michelangelo secretly know about these Easter eggs and allow them? Or was his no signatures rule simply aimed at large lettering? You step back, spine popping like throne kindling, and scan the expanse. Hundreds of square feet remain unpainted. Infinity needs at least one more coat, probably several. Somewhere in the grid of prophets, ignudi, and medallions, other anonymous strokes wait, tiny rebellions against total erasure. The thought comforts, a fraternity of ghosts who refuse to be footnotes. Michelangelo glances over, eyes narrowed, as if he can smell mutiny in the air, but your face is all innocence highlighted in titanium white. He grunts, returns to battle, and you file away your microscopic signature under classified, artist existed. Tomorrow you might try the ear canal. Tonight, anonymity tastes of linseed and chalk, a flavor at once humble and defiant. You wipe the brush on a rag already star-charted with earlier colors, each smear a silent co-signatory to the act of being there. The ceiling keeps its counsel, you keep your secret, and both parties consider that fair. Moonlight finds the high windows, slips between iron bars, and spills across the ceiling like liquid pewter. Work stopped an hour ago, but you volunteered to babysit the drying plaster, part responsibility, part inability to leave. In the silver wash, prophets look phosphorescent, their fresh ultramarine robes glowing as though stitched from midnight itself. Michelangelo descended for wine. You remain, candle extinguished, scaffold creaking under tiny tidal shifts of temperature. The chapel feels unclothed, stripped of daytime echoes, and you, its lone parishioner, worshipping at the altar of almost finished. A widely accepted historical fact, moonlight contains very little ultraviolet energy, so it rarely degrades pigments. Restorers occasionally conduct moon viewings to check tonal balances invisible under electric light. A lesser-known quirky detail, night watchmen in the 1700s claimed the ceiling moved during full moons, an illusion caused by shadows sliding across relief contours as the angle changed. An open question historians still wonder about. Did Michelangelo ever climb up alone at night to adjust details by moon glow? Or did he trust daylight alone to reveal truth? You rest your palm on the railing, feel the wood inhale chill, and notice your gold fingerprint from earlier has tarnished to a mellow bronze. Moon chemistry rewriting meters. Jonah, no longer judgmental, seems drowsy. His pupils dilate in the dim, ecstasy softened into something like empathy. You whisper a thank you for the staring contest, feel silly, decide silliness is a fair price for communion, and stay silent anyway. Footsteps echo far below, probably a guard's, sandals slap, keys jingle, then fade. The chapel exhales, a long draft that smells of damp stone and centuries-old incense ground into cracks. You imagine every layer of paint ever applied breathing with it, a collective lung stretching across time. Your own lungs match tempo, moonlight, shadow, and heartbeat sync into one slow chord. Somewhere in that hush, the ceiling offers a wordless verdict. You were here, you helped, you may go. You tuck the promise into memory like a pressed flower, careful not to crush its petals, and begin the long descent. The ladder down is a different organism at night, each rung colder, creakier, convinced the day's fatigue has weakened your knees' diplomatic relations. You descend sideways, shoulder blades kissing moonlit plaster, counting backwards from 20 like a launch sequence in reverse. Halfway, a splinter stakes claim in your palm, the scaffold's parting gift, tiny wooden flag asserting sovereignty. You hiss, pause, consider yanking it free, decide leaving it might keep you awake long enough to reach ground. 10 rungs remain. They sag, sigh, tell stories about every foot that ever trusted them, and you add tonight's addition in trembling baritone. A widely accepted historical fact, the original wooden scaffold was dismantled after completion. Michelangelo reused some beams for later projects, recycling sweat equity. A lesser-known quirky detail, carpenters deliberately mixed wood types, soft pine for flexibility, hard oak for strength, so the structure sang different notes under weight, an accidental xylophone. An open question historians still wonder about: did Michelangelo design the scaffold himself, or did he adapt a theater fly system, turning chapel into stage? 8 rungs to go. Your calf muscles vibrate like lute strings tuned by an anxious novice. Moonlight fades as you drop below window line. Darkness thickens, smelling of wax and cold stone. You picture the climb upward tomorrow. Same wood, same splinters, same gravitational grudge, yet the thought feels less burden, more ritual. 7, 6. The splinter throbs in sync with pulse, tiny metronome conducting descent. 5, 4. You negotiate the final twist where ladder meets marble, hop the last 2 rungs, and land softer than expected, knees bending into a genuflect you didn't plan but the floor accepts. You withdraw the splinter, half-inch of cedar, dagger-shaped, roll it between fingers, then slip it into a pouch alongside the lappy's grain. Souvenirs, 1 sky, 1 scaffold. Proof of purchase for a day rented from infinity. The chapel stretches around you, vast and moon-silvered, echoing your heartbeat back as whispers. Somewhere above, the ceiling settles into stone sleep, curing, dreaming of tomorrow's hands. You tip an imaginary hat to Jonah, to prophets, to cherubs who bet on sneezes, and tiptoe toward the side door, leaving the dark to finish what you started. Inside the emptied chapel, moonlight has clocked out, leaving only a single votive candle near the altar to keep insomnia company. You should head for the dormitory, but your legs veto, steering you instead to a pew midpoint between floor and ceiling, equal distance from dust and divinity. You collapse sideways, spine folding like damp paper, cheek finding the smooth walnut rail that countless cardinals have gripped during conclave votes. The wood still holds human warmth, or maybe that's borrowed from your own overheated skin. Above, the ceiling hovers like a low, painted sky, and for the first time you experience the work as spectator rather than co-author, an odd promotion from technician to tourist. A widely accepted historical fact, the Sistine Chapel serves as the site of papal conclave. Cardinals sit beneath the frescoes while electing new popes. A lesser-known quirky detail, during conclave, custodians roll out carpets muffling foot echoes, turning the chapel into an acoustical cocoon where whispers carry like stage asides. An open question historians still wonder about: does the imagery overhead subtly influence voters, clouds parting for divine endorsement? Or is faith assumed immune to interior decorating? Your eyes adjust. Shapes detach themselves from darkness. Jonah's foot, previously benign, now blocks an entire quadrant of sky, big toe the size of your head, cuticle sharp enough to slice doubt. Prophets rotate slowly in your peripheral vision, an artifact of exhausted retinas, or perhaps they're stretching after hours of holding still. You blink, motion stops. The candle flame shivers, casting gold ripples across marble, and you feel the building exhale, a long, centuries-old sigh that loosens your own lungs in sympathy. Tomorrow will deliver fresh plaster, fresh deadlines, fresh opportunities to air and repair. Tonight, though, the ceiling needs no midwife. It cures in peace, and you keep vigil the way a parent watches a sleeping child. Present, useless content. Your eyelids sandbag themselves. The pew becomes a raft adrift between nave and firmament. Somewhere between Jonah's heel and Daniel's lion, consciousness decides it too can clock out, and you let it go, trusting stone to remember what flesh forgets. Dawn leaks through the shutters again. Same indigo, same ladder, same olive oil slick on rung 3. You climb, splintered palm complaining, eyes crusted with sleep and marble dust. The scaffold feels shorter. Either you've grown overnight or infinity has quietly downsized. Michelangelo is already overhead, silhouette haloed by fresh torchlight, arm moving like a metronome that's lost its warranty. He doesn't greet you. Morning is just night with better marketing. So you hook your pail, test the plank's mood, surly but functional, and survey what's left. A strip of sky no wider than a prayer, unpainted, waiting its turn to become forever. A widely accepted historical fact, Michelangelo completed the Sistine ceiling in October 1512, after approximately 4 years of intermittent work. A lesser-known quirky detail, the final section dried during a thunderstorm. Rainwater leaked through a roof tile, leaving a faint water bloom that restorers still debate removing. An open question historians still wonder about. Did Michelangelo feel triumph, relief, or immediate dread about the next papal commission the moment the last brushstroke set? You mix dawn itself, ultramarine kissed with lead tin yellow until it blushes green, then feather the horizon where God's finger hovers above atoms. The space between them is minuscule in reality, cavernous in metaphor, and today you're filling it with sunrise. Each bristle lays down another heartbeat of light. The plaster drinks, sighs, hardens. Somewhere below, early Mass begins, but the chapel's acoustics flip Latin upward, so you work accompanied by muffled Alleluia wallpaper. Stroke, breathe, chorus, repeat, production line for transcendence. The gap closes. Finger almost meets finger, both still a millimeter apart in wet paint, close enough for voltage, far enough for free will. You add one final highlight on God's knuckle, pull back and feel the ceiling finish itself while you watch. Michelangelo lowers his brush, cracks his neck like dropped pottery, and for once says nothing critical, just exhales, long and slow, as if deflating after 4 years. You follow suit. Infinity, give or take a coat, is officially checked off the list. The scaffold stops swaying, or maybe you both simply stop expecting it to fall. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon coos approval. Dawn brightens, Rome wakes, and you realize you've run out of ceiling. The ceiling settles above you like a quilt stitched from sky and time, every pigment now cooling into stone. Your shoulders unhook, vertebra by vertebra, as if someone loosened laces you didn't know were tied. Breathe in, count 4 heartbeats, breathe out, count 6. Let the chapel's vast hush rock you slower than any cradle. The prophets have finished their stories for the night. Even Jonah blinks, finally content to rest. Below, the marble floor breathes cold, but up here the air is warm with yesterday's sun trapped in plaster. Let it sink through your ribs, warm the blood, soften the pulse. Nothing is required of you now, no brush, no scaffold, no whispered Latin. Just linger inside this painted firmament, eyelids drifting shut like curtains drawn against dawn. Each exhale spills you further outward, a tide slipping from shore until your body is only outline, only breath, only quiet. The ceiling keeps its vigil. You are free to dream, sweet dreams.